Hello and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Tonight we are joined by award-winning author Kim Sigafus. And I hope I pronounced your last name correct.
Well, it was close.
Okay, we'll get. Yay! Go ahead and pronounce it for me, would you please?
It's Sigafus.
Gafus. Okay. So the S is completely silence on that.
No, no, it's Sigafus.
Okay, Sigafus. Got you. All right. I'm going to make a mental note on that. Fix that here on my paper. All right. So I want to start off tonight, right, with talking about know where to hide. Because I heard when I was looking it up, I thought that the snippets in the book were based on your life. And I would really like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes, I seem to put little bits and pieces of my life
Mm-hmm.
into all of the writing that I do. I think in some ways it's cathartic for me too. And also, I'm hoping that by talking about what I've experienced, that hopefully I help people understand that they're not the only one going through these things, and how I dealt with it hopefully will help other people and how they dealt with things. I was bullied as a child, and so um, I was bullied by both children and teachers.
Ah.
And so I grew up in the 60s and 70s, were my younger years,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a darker skinned person than the people that were around me, and so they didn't quite know what to make of me. I don't think, and we came from a different culture, and then a lot of the people that were around us, and so I think they just didn't understand. But regardless, there was a lot of bullying and teasing and things like that going on. And so I had a tough childhood growing up.
Yeah. Well, I can understand that too. I got picked on in school too. I was the youngest of three. And so I understand where you're coming from. The school bus was not a favorite place of mine. So I get that. I really do. I was a little different. I teased my hair up real high. You're my little rebellious side,
Yeah.
and it wasn't taken. You know what I mean? It wasn't taken the greatest in my time, and I went to school in the 80s and I graduated like in 91. If that really dates me, if anyone wants to do the math on that. So I can understand it. Adolescence is a hard time. It really is. So
Yeah.
I can understand that. Now, the book. Tell everyone a little bit more about the book in detail, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Nowhere to Hide is it's actually it's actually a perfect title for that book.
Okay.
So it's the first book in the autumn, what I affectionately call the Autumn Dawn series, and her name is Autumn Dawn in the book. She is um a girl who lives on a reservation, and she goes to a reservation school in Minnesota, and she is being bullied. She's dyslexic, so
Oh.
she has trouble reading. She also has a speech impediment, and so she talks a little bit funny, just um, because she cannot pronounce some of her letters. And so because of that, she's picked on a lot. And though in the meantime, she is going home to parents who are newly separated, um, and just she's left to do a lot of chores. Her mother is gone. She's left to raising, her brother, and so she has a tough time at home. And mom is going through a tough time emotionally due to the separation from her husband, and so there's all kinds of stuff going on with her parents. And so she really has nowhere to go to talk to anyone or to get any help. She feels very alone.
Mm.
And it isn't until her father's aunt, who just so happens to have her apartment building being renovated, has to move in for a while, um, until the renovation is done, that she actually finds an ear, somebody who will listen to her and understand what is happening. And so that's really the turning point in her life. And Aunt Jessie, her name is, and she's a very pivotal character in the book because she also not only helps Autumn feel better about herself and look at her life as the glass being half full instead of half empty,
Mm-hmm.
but also is able to help her parents navigate the waters of being separated from each other and what effect that has on their children that they're not realizing. So the it's a very long journey for Autumn. She ends up running away, and her parents can't find her. She's gone for a while. I mean, she does a lot of stuff to try to get away from the situation, and realizes eventually, as Jesse points out, you can't run away from your problems. They're portable and they follow you everywhere. So
Right.
she has to eventually turn around and stand up for herself. And she's being bullied mainly by Sydney, who is a girl at school who has kind of a posse of girls with her. And so she learns, she has to learn how to stand up for herself and to believe in herself and to respect herself. And that's really what the book is about and what this series is about.
I was very pleased to see that the book is on some scholastic sites for schools. So I think that's very I'm tongue tied, sorry. It's very commendable. There you go. There's the right word. It's very commendable. And I was happy to see that such a book is on the shelves for such young adults to be able to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very happy too. I can relate to Autumn. On that first book was a lot of that stuff happened to me. I actually did run away. I ran to a playground
Oh.
that was in town and fell asleep in. There was a fort, a wooden fort that was built up, and I fell asleep in it.
Oh.
And woke up and it was dark. And the same thing happened to Autumn. And so um, I think it's a believable story. Not only did it happen to me, but I do think it's very apropos for the way things are unfortunately going for some kids in
Mm-hmm.
school, whether it's online bullying or just being bullied to your face in school. And I think I don't know, unfortunately, I would love to say that it will go away, but I just don't know. And so I think that learning how to deal with it just on a personal level and making sure your kids know, you know, how to keep their self esteem up through it all, because that's what really takes the beating, I think, is your
Right.
self esteem.
Well, I think your book, you might be correct that there might be not any way to get completely rid of the situation, but I think your book is one healthy way toward making it happen, if that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Since we're talking about your books, since we jumped right into your books, I want to say it. And the reason I did was because I found the book. Um, I found it very commendable. Again, like I said, I thought it was a right place book and something that could help youth in a very helpful way. Um, but you know what I mean. But especially since you yourself went through it, I found it very something I needed to bring up first and foremost. So let's put it that way. But since we did jump right into your books, let's talk a little bit about. I think I read that when you write, you go through a process. You keep it in your head for a while before you actually start to formulate a process for it.
I do. I actually um, think about it for a while. It's a while. It's not a day or a week. I mean, it can be several weeks before I sit down. I don't ever like to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to write a book now, and then I pull up the page and stare at it. So I always have an idea of who who my characters are and the important points of the story that I want to get across. And
Right.
then as I'm writing, I fill the rest of it in. And I don't write a synopsis very often unless I need to, unless my editor asks me for it, because I have a tendency to listen to my characters, and they tend to veer off the synopsis. so, um, and so my editor does know that about me, but I pretty much have the gist of the story in my head before I sit down and write it.
Okay. Well, it would seem from what research I did that writing has been in your genes since your youth,
Yeah.
and keeping that in mind. And since you write for youth too, I know you have other books too that are nonfiction, and I'll get to that. But I wanted you to tell me a little bit about that first book. I think it veered toward talking about a dog, and you wrote it for school, and that your teacher really liked it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think about that once in a while. I had a wonderful teacher, and we had to write a story about a dog. And so I wrote this nice, probably too long story. Most kids were writing a page or a paragraph, and I was going on and on. But she called me up and after the class had ended and sat me down and told me how much she loved my story and how she loved my characters and how I should be a writer someday because this is something that seems to come naturally to me and I'm a good storyteller. And I never forgot that because we moved around a lot as a child and I never remembered a whole lot of my teachers' names. But I always remembered her because, and I think it's so important for teachers to take that. It took her 5 minutes out of her day and it pretty much changed my whole life. I mean, I knew from then on that that's what I was going to do was write, and so I just needed that um, push in that direction and someone telling me that I could do it. That was really important to me.
It always takes that one teacher to make such a great impact. It really does. It changes your how outlook, wouldn't you say?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, so we talked about your youth generated books. I want to take a minute and speak about native fiction. Tell us more about the genre and what you would like to see more coming out of the native fiction drama.
Um, what I would like to see coming out. I really I really like books that are based in some form of reality or some reality meaning how things really are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I there's a lot of really great books out there that I've read that are they're kind of steeped in some mythology about Native Americans and they play on that.
Mm-hmm.
And while the story is really good, it I kind of shake my head when I'm done reading it. Um, so I like stories that really talk about what it is, the tough road that it is to be Native, as well as the joyful road
Right.
that it is. And so as I think if people pick those books up, they're going to get a better idea of the culture and why we do things that we do and why we celebrate things that we do and just about how we think about life and how we think about things. And it's not really all that different than how everyone else thinks about things, but I think Native Americans people there's a mysticism to being a Native American. People now will come up to me and be very excited if they have a little bit of Native in their background,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really come full circle from 60 years ago when you'd never told anyone you were Native, because you couldn't get a job or a place to live or anything else. So um, I think we're moving forward as a society in that, but I really do like the books that are, like I said, that are steeped in a lot of the history or a lot of the culture.
Right.
And hopefully that will continue to grow. Joe Bruchac, Tim Tingle, Louise Erdrich, all the native writers that I know, and then those are real good books for people to be reading um, about the culture and how things are.
Right. Well, I can get it. I would probably be the same way. I'd be like, hey, guess what? I have a little bit of Indian in me. So I can get the excitement. And I think the thing is when this generation, we start to do a lot more of our genealogy. So when we start to dig deeper into that, my mother did that. Of course, we already knew that we were Cherokee. And of course, my mother's maiden name was Chisholm, which, the whole Chisholm of, trail and stuff like that. That's where their name came from. So I get that sense. Um, but for me, me and my sisters, we only have enough that we're like the last of the line. You know what I mean? Where it goes down that much. So I can understand the excitement when you start to go down that and you learn about your past and that you have a place, you know what I'm saying, among that. I know there are some negative as far as being Native American, but I know for myself, I wish that I would have been able to touch that bit of my life, that piece of my life of the past, a little bit more than I can. So I can understand the excitement. So you're saying basically you would like to see a more realistic view from Native Americans. Would you talk about history or just in fiction itself?
You well, yeah, I mean, some history, but in reality, I don't think people understand. For example, a good example is I don't think people really understand what it's like to live on the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're, the some people will ask me if people are all laying in the street, destitute and drugged out and drunk and and it's obviously they've never been to a reservation. And are there people like that? Well, sure there are, but there's people like that everywhere, so it's not just a
Right.
reservation.
Right.
But yeah, but I think just how are we doing now, and what are we doing now, and what contributions are we making to society now? I probably will not live long enough for this society to actually stop introducing people as a culture instead of saying, the first Native American woman to run this or the first African American man to do this. And I wish we would come to the day where you could just introduce somebody and not have to introduce what culture they're from
Right.
because we're all the same people, basically. We're all love and hurt the same way. So um, I think I think the I think that it's important that people realize that we are all human beings. That's what we're all. We're all here going through the same stuff. Regardless what culture it is, how we deal with it is what's different. I think
Right.
from one.
Okay.
So yeah,
Well, since we're talking about Native fiction, let's take a minute and talk about Native elders. I believe this is your nonfiction book.
yep, that's one of the nonfiction books. Yep. I wrote Native Elders and Native Writers. Native Elders was a really fun book to write. It was a really tough book to get going. When you approach an elder about anything, there's a certain protocol,
Mm-hmm.
and when I needed to interview them for the book, um, I did not have the option of flying all over the country and can't to get to go through the whole protocol with every single elder. So excuse me. So usually you approach an elder with tobacco. And that's just one of the ways that you ask permission to speak to them about their life. And so Getting going took me a little bit of time, but I loved writing the book. There are elders in both the U.S. and Canada that are featured in that book. Percy Henry is in that book. He is a Canadian. He lives at the top of Canada, which is pretty far away from where I live. And he is one of two people that speaks his culture. He's got to be over 100
Oh,
now. He won't tell me how old he is. He's got to be over 100. And he his story is very interesting, and they're all very, very interesting stories about how they grew up and how they perceive the world and what their, what their advice is, and that sort of thing. And so it was very interesting to do interviews. And actually, he doesn't speak much English, so I had to go through an interpreter when I talked to him.
that's interesting. I stopped the timer because I didn't want it to beep out you. So I'm typically out of time, but I do have a couple more questions. So if you don't mind, would you mind if I go ahead with a few more questions?
Okay.
Okay. So tell me what the phrase accomplish something means to you.
You know, I don't mean to laugh, but my husband is a substitute teacher,
Uh huh.
and he writes on the board every day, accomplish something. Um, accomplish something. To me, that means um, do something positive every day for yourself or for somebody else. Um, it means, for me personally, it means um, to either I can try to get something done that's going to move myself along to a better place. So if I'm working on a book, my accomplishment for that day might be I've sat and thought about what I'm going to write about, or maybe I've done research. It can also mean that maybe I've reached out to somebody that I knew was going through a hard time, that has, the seasonal depression. I have a lot of friends that have that. So I think accomplishing something is just reaching out and making sure you're doing something every day, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else.
Right. Well, that's touching. Actually, the reason I brought that phrase up was because I read that your husband brings that up to you. But also, since you talked about seasonal depression, that leads into my very last question. As we're going into the whole holidays for this month, and I know there's a lot of holidays even outside of the months, and we don't have to just talk about Christmas or Hanukkah or, whatever other things coming up for New Year's and the many more that are follow. But tell me about a holiday that you could see finding your way into your books and why. We've got about 6 more minutes if you don't mind.
Okay, a holiday that has found its way into my books.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
Do do do. No, I'm just teasing.
Let's see. I think I think the you know I grew up. I'm Native, but my father died when I was one, and he was Native, and my mom was white. Okay, she was Caucasian,
Mm-hmm.
and so I grew up Irish Catholic, and so I think in some of the books, that Irish Catholic upbringing comes up a little bit more than the Native sometimes. I think learning how to combine those two has shown up in some of my books as well. Um, but I don't know that I've actually spoken about a specific holiday in my books.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can't. It's hard to answer that because I haven't written a whole chapter on Christmas, with autumn dawn. So it's not like that, I guess. But I do think that if I was to write some kind of a excerpt from my own life, that's what it would be. It would be probably what I have now, which is sitting down with, um, you know, for Christmas with some Irish stew and some turkey and wild rice, um, kind of a dish
Mm-hmm.
that I learned from one grandma and the other grandma. Our meals now and our holidays now are a combination of native foods and Irish foods. And so we have kind of a strange collection of food on our table. And so that's probably what will go into the books as well.
Right. Well, I think that you are perfect of a blended trait through your entire family. You seem to be the pivotal point to bring both to connect. So I think that's awesome. I think that brings both sides of your family traditions into one. And then you can carry that on to your family. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on and putting up with my rambling because I'm telling you, I get tongue tied. But I want to thank you so much. You were an awesome guest. I really loved the book and the whole ideas behind it, especially your ones relating to the youth. And I think you take an issue and you take a spin on it, not just with your native heritage, but just as going through adolescence in itself, because I think it speaks to what a lot would be going through during that time in their lives. I want to thank you again for our guests for being on tonight. I know we're getting close to the holidays, and I'm trying to do the best we can to greet each day with a pleasant smile like you guys bring to me. Thanks for joining us tonight. Come back next Thursday. I think it's the 30th before New Year's, and we'll have another show. Thank you again for coming in. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye for now.